Hello and welcome back. We are in chapter 17. We're going to be covering biosocial development in the period of life called emerging adulthood. Now you'll notice we are back to actual ages instead of stages, right? In middle childhood, we ended it with puberty. And for adolescents, it begins with puberty and ends with emerging adulthood. Emerging adulthood is defined as that period of time between the age of 18 and the age of 25. Your textbook introduces some of the controversy surrounding this age bracket and points out that some people think that this is a significant developmental period and other people think it's an artifact of Western civilization. I'm going to throw my 2 cents worth into that. When I was an undergraduate taking lifespan development, young adulthood was the period from 18 to 35 when I first started as an undergraduate. I don't remember exactly what year I took lifespan development, but it was somewhere between 1984 and 1988. And we were calling young adulthood 18 to 35. Then slowly the upper boundary of young adulthood creeped up. So it went 18 to 40, then 18 to 50. And you get to a certain point and you're like, are you still in young adulthood here? Honestly. So some researchers argued that there's this special area, this special period called emerging adulthood, where you are legally an adult, but oftentimes still dependent on your parents or on some other structure, like the military or something, to kind of give you stability and security. And you aren't truly autonomous during this period of time. Maybe you're in college and your parents are paying tuition, or you're in college and you're deferring the cost by doing student loans or something like that, where you're not completely independent yet. It's kind of, in my opinion, a return to pretty close to what it was when I first entered the field. 18 to 35 isn't that different from 18 to 25, is it? So for me, I oftentimes you'll hear me accidentally calling this young adulthood because it's really the youngest members of the adult group. All right, anyway, that was me sharing my bias with you. So hopefully you found that somewhat interesting. Let's go on. All right, so it's labeled a new stage of development. And for a lot of people who really embrace the idea of emerging adulthood, they have rejected the idea of a social clock. I'm a crazy person who I think there's such a thing called young adulthood or emerging adulthood, and it's a function of the social clock. So I'm kind of a hybrid of different theorists, right? Well, I'm going to show you why I think there's still a social clock. Most people in America graduate high school at around 18. Some of you might have been 17, some of you might have been 19, but on average, it's around 18 years old. Most people enroll in something pretty quick after that. They either start going to college, or they join the military, or they take a gap year, or they join the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps or something. Like most people do maybe they start working in a job that they know is just a stopgap, just sort of buys them a little bit of time, right? But they know that this is not something permanent. And this is something that we all start doing around 18 or 19 years of age. Usually somewhere around 22, we leave whatever that was that we were in the military, or we graduate college, or we start thinking, okay, I've got to get a real job that's going to support me as an independent person, or something like that. We sort of have this change of mind where we start to think about ourselves more autonomously. Most people will enter steady employment where they have a full-time job and they maybe have some benefits, or this is something that they would be more likely to call a career than just a job, something like that, around age 25. The average age of motherhood is 26.3 years of age right now, and the average age for a woman to get married is about age 27. Now remember, when you're calculating averages, numbers can be pulled up or down based on, outliers. So keep those things in mind when you're going, wait, motherhood comes before marriage. Not for the average person, but because those who become mothers before marriage, it's oftentimes very young, it pulls that average age down. And then for men, the average age for marriage right now is about age 29. So I would argue that the old years that we used to have when I was in school, 18 to 35, makes a lot more sense for the period of emerging adulthood, because what used to be the defining factor in developmentalists' minds about when you've left adolescence and become an adult was when you took on the responsibilities of adulthood, have a steady job, get married, have children, these kinds of things. Now, these are antiquated ideas, so please don't judge me because I just gave the list I gave, but that's what they used to think. Well, a lot of those behaviors are still occurring, but they're occurring much later than they used to. And so, you don't come right out of high school and get your steady job, get married at 21, start having children at 23. Like that's not the social clock anymore, but we still have a social clock. Now, part of the reason why people have rejected the concept of social clock recently is that it makes it sound like this is a list of shoulds, that you should graduate at 18, that you should go into the military or college, that you should get married at 27 or 29, depending on your sex. That's not what the social clock is telling us. It's telling us what's happening on average. It also is an indicator of sort of what the people around you might be pressuring you towards. That's why it's a social clock. It's not a biological clock. It's a social clock where other people are kind of giving you the impression it's time to be doing the next thing. Those people might be your parents. Those people might be your friends. They might be, the relatives that you only see on Thanksgiving. It could be, pressure from different sorts of places. But the idea is, once you graduate high school, people are really seriously asking you, what are you going to do next? I mean, they may have been asking you that since you were little. What do you want to be when you grow up and things like that. But when you graduate high school, they in earnest start to go, what are you doing next? Right? If you do something kind of temporary, they're going to be asking, when that's over, what are you doing next? Right? Like, people ask you those questions. Are you seeing anyone? Is it serious? Are you going to get married? Once you get married, are you having children? I mean, this is what people do. It's kind of like the chit chat that people have is oftentimes very personal. And even people who you think, why do you care? Like, what is it? What's in it for you? Whether I, am going to marry this person that I'm dating or, not. I mean, what do you care? But it's like this weird societal, even, if you take Bronfenbrenner's circles of influence, it's not just your nuclear family that's invested in what you're doing. It's kind of a sign to other people also about whether what they've done or what their kids have done is good or normal or whatever. So it's all a bunch of comparison, which implies to me a social clock, that there's sort of expectations about what people should be doing at different ages. So I personally, your textbook doesn't even, I don't think, address the social clock anymore. But I think that's a mistake. I think there's a lot of pressure on especially 18 to 25-year-olds to be planning out what they're going to be doing and committing to things that they might not be ready to commit to, because the people around them are pressuring them. So I think it's wrong to get rid of the social clock as a concept, personally. Well, let's jump into some biological stuff then. We in young adulthood are enjoying our peak physical functioning. Our sensory accuracy is better than it's going to be for the rest of our lives. You can see emerging adulthood would be, between the 10 and the 30. That would be age 20. We've reached our peak of being able to correctly identify things just by odor. We have reached our peak hearing, where we can identify spoken words, which is really the measure of hearing. Can you hear the difference between bat and that? Those kinds of things. That peaks in emerging adulthood. Our ability to see without any kind of visual aid peaks in emerging adulthood. So our sensory accuracy is the best. Our reaction time is faster than it's going to be at other times. So what this chart is showing you is the horizontal line in the middle is sort of nothing's happening, point of reaction, and then anything above that is fast, because it's actually got it flipped in a weird labeling where negative is above that horizontal, so it means that you're reacting faster. Taking longer to react is down below. Those are positive numbers down below. And so what you see is that young children are slower than the young adults who are in the black line. The young adults have the quickest reaction time, followed by the older children. And then the slowest to respond are the elderly adults. So fastest reaction time, which is why young adults really love some video games. They've got quick reaction times. They can sort of both hands at the same time, triggers, joysticks, whatever the A and the B and the X are. I don't even know. My son finds it just pathetic that I won't even memorize what the buttons are on the whatever this controller is. It's like, just play games that involve either triggers or the joystick. Don't give me all this stuff to do. My personal favorite, by the way, is his VR headset and playing Beat Saber. Now that, I am all over playing Beat Saber. I could do that. But the games that these people must be playing with these controllers, even when I was a young adult, as defined by the antiquated model when I was in my 30s, I couldn't figure it out. It was not my bag, baby. Even when I was in high school, I didn't like playing Pong. I just want you to know. I did not care for it because it's the reaction time part plus combining like all the different triggers and buttons. Enough defensiveness. I'll move on. Peak muscular strength during this period of time. For both sexes, this is the strongest that they're going to be. And so it's not surprising that a lot of young people engage in sports and working out and other kinds of things because this is their peak muscle strength time of life. Manual dexterity is at its peak. Here's a test that we give in psychology for measuring dexterity. And what you've got is they kind of look like they're checkers discs, but that's not what they are. The thing that she's holding in her right hand is actually hollow on the bottom. Those black things that you're seeing are actually pegs that she needs to put that, like it's a cap, on top of the black peg. And so you have to move all of them in a sequence, all the red ones from where they start to like the empty black ones, and it's a sequence and has a bunch of rules to it. And what you're really measuring is how accurately they can, remove it from the peg it's on and place it onto the peg where it belongs. And a lot of it has to do with speed to measure how well you do on that task. And what they find using that kind of test is this curve. It's broken down by race, but what you see is that everybody kind of moves in the same trajectory, where the best performance tends to be, emerging adulthood, the 20 to 24 range, the 25 to 34 range, actually, you're still doing just as well. So manual dexterity, what you see is people taking up a lot of activities. Here's a great example of a behavior that requires manual dexterity that a lot of times younger people don't really like to do. And people will establish these kinds of tasks in young adulthood, and then they will keep on with it into later adulthood. All right. It's good to remember that this is still a healthy time. I really emphasized when we talked about, late childhood that it is the most healthy time with the fewest deaths in that age group. But if you look at the 15 to 24, which again, I've complained about this before, that none of our statistics ever seem to lay exactly over the age brackets that we're looking at. If you look at the 15 to 24, still very healthy time, especially among other adults, right? So very healthy time. And of course, remember, death rates are going to include accidents and homicides and suicides and things that have nothing to do with health, but have to do with lifestyle avoidable factors. And so keep that in mind. All right, speaking of which, the 10 leading causes of injury death by age group. So I've highlighted with the circle here the 15 to 24, which again is not a perfect overlap with emerging adulthood, but you'll see that the number one cause of death is unintentional motor vehicle traffic. Number two is unintentional poisoning. Number three is homicide from a firearm. Number four is suicide by a firearm. Number five is suicide by suffocation. 6 is suicide by poisoning. 7 is unintentional drowning. And by the way, if you were to add up those different suicide types, including the suicide fall, which is at the very bottom, if you add those all up, that's how you get ahead of homicides for the leading cause of death for this group. Unintentional drowning. Homicide is red, so we're on homicide. This is where you're some kind of knife or something that is used for the homicide. And then undetermined poisoning is number 9. So you see a lot of injuries that are not accidental, and if you think about it like that, right? It's either a homicide or suicide kind of situation. And so unintentional motor vehicle traffic, unintentional poisoning, unintentional drowning, undetermined poisoning, so they don't know whether it was on purpose or not, are, that's only 4 causes. The rest of them all have things to do with suicide and homicide. So there's a lot of lifestyle factors, or voluntariness to a lot of the deaths within this age group that were not present for the 10 to 14 and younger. All right, let's go ahead and take a break here, and we'll come back and talk about the concept of senescence.